the menu items project, where we'll take a look at how we can display products or any kind of items dynamically. So once the page loads, we'll use JavaScript to populate our page. And also we'll set up some filtering options. Now, why I really like this project, because displaying items using JavaScript or maybe even with React and Vue and Angular is going to be your bread and butter. Now, granted, most likely you'll do that by getting that data somewhere externally, whether that is a database, whether that is a third-party API, or that sort of thing. But in our case, of course, data will be local because we haven't covered those AJAX requests. But that doesn't mean that what we'll learn is going to be useless. In fact, the only difference is that once you get that data externally, well, you just add a few lines of code, you get that data, but then still everything that we'll do in this project, you'd have to repeat anyway. So don't dismiss it just because data is local. That is our setup. The rest of the things that we'll learn in this video are going to be very useful because, like already said, this will be your bread and butter. Getting some kind of item and then using JavaScript to iterate over those items, then decide what you would want to display on a screen, what kind of functionality you would want to add, and so on and so forth. So we have our project, of course. As always, we will start with index.html. In this case, it is very important because we will add this dynamically, this HTML syntax. So I'll show you why I always like to set up my HTML first, see how my project will look like, and only then dynamically add it in JavaScript because it's going to be much more easier. We just need to copy and paste 2 lines of code and we'll be good to go. So we head back to our setup. And then, of course, at the moment, the only thing I have is my brave and proud and awesome heading 1 with the text of menu project. So, of course, we would want to change that around and we'll go with a section. The class will be menu. I'll close the sidebar just so I have more real estate. I'll have a title class here. So title class, and I'll add, a comment as well. So comment, title, then my div, and then within a div, I'll have the heading 2. And I'm going to add the text of our menu. Okay, beautiful. And then underline, just some fancy CSS. And of course, when I say fancy, I'm being sarcastic. And then I have my filter buttons. So right after the title, let's see where it ends. Let's add a comment for filter button, which at the moment we're not going to add them, but still we'll have the comments of filter buttons. Okay, awesome. And then we'll have our menu items. So another comment here, and we'll say menu items. Then I'm going to add a div with a class of section center again. So section center. And essentially this div is just responsible for my column layout. And then I would want to select that single item. And that's going to be the code that we'll later grab and just copy and paste in our JavaScript because it's just going to speed up our workflow. So let me save it and see the way it is. Okay, I have our menu. Beautiful. And like I said, now I'm creating that one single item. So we'll not worry about the buttons at the moment, but we care about this one item. So at the moment, we'll just structure one. We'll do a little bit of copy and paste just so we can see that our column layout works. And then, like I already said probably 50,000 times, we'll just grab that code that we have for that item and add it to our JavaScript. And as always, I do like to have the comments here, so single item, just because I think it gives a little bit of structure. So I'll go here, end of single item. And then it will be an article, and we'll have a class of single item, or menu item. Not a single item, menu item. And then within this article, I'll have the image. Now, at the moment, I'm just looking for the item that is in my root folder. So I'm not looking in the images. Later on, we'll also take a look at the images folder. But at the moment, I'm just looking for the menu item. So this guy over here. So I look over in my files, and I'm looking for the menu item. Okay, beautiful. And then I'll add here the class of photo. Class will be photo. And then as far as the alternative, we'll just write menu item. Let's see what we'll have. I save it. Awesome. And then I'll have a div that will have the info. So I have the photo. That was one part of my item. And then the second part will be this info. And since I need it for my layout, I'll place this in a div. So I'm going to go here with a class of item info. And then within a div, we'll have a heading for buttermilk. And of course, you can write whatever you want, but just to have a little bit more real world scenario, I'm just going to go with a real text. So buttermilk pancakes will have a heading for. I'll add here a class right away, and the class will be price. And then I'm going to have a $sign of $15. Let's save it. Okay, I do have my text. Beautiful. And then I'll place this actually in a header. So let me go with the header. Let me select both of them, both things here, and place it in a header. And then right after header, I'll have my paragraph. And the text over here is going to be item text, or no, that is going to be the class. The text will be whatever you'd want. In this case, I'm going to go with 20 words, but the class will be item text. Let's add here item text. Now let's save it. And just to double check that my column layout works, I'm going to take my item and then copy and paste a few times. Now we don't need to change the values or anything like that. I just want to see whether on a bigger screen I'll have two column layout. And I do, which is awesome. So now in this case, I can press Command Z and go back to that one single item. So once I save it, I have all the HTML that I currently need, and we can start setting up our functionality in the JavaScript. Okay, so let's add the logic where the moment the page will load, then we'll dynamically populate our menu with an items. So if we head to app.js, we'll see a menu array. And then in the menu array, we'll have a bunch of objects. Now each object represents that one single item. Again, we'll have a property of ID, which as a side note, we'll not use. This is just to mimic a real world response. Then we'll have title, and then of course we'll have some kind of value. There's going to be a category, because we'll use it for filtering. We'll have some kind of price, some kind of image. Now this is a tricky one where, again, since we're not getting this from external API, if you ever would want to use that menu array somewhere else, just make sure that you also have this images folder, and in fact it is in the root. So as you can see here, the path, the dot, and then images, that just means that this code will be located in the index.html, and that just references that images array. So if you'll try to run this code without those images, well, those images won't show up. Or even if the images are going to be there, but the path is going to be different. For example, you'll nest images somewhere in a different folder. Again, the functionality will not work because this specifically references the images folder as they are in the root. And then we have some kind of description that is going to be displayed here in the bottom. And yes, like I mentioned before, normally you would get this data externally. You would set up some kind of AJAX request over here, and you would get the data. Now, once you get the data, again, everything is going to be exactly the same like we will write in this video. There's going to be no difference. You will get the data, and then you'll iterate over the data. You'll decide what you would want to display, what kind of functionality, and yada, yada, yada. But the initial setup, yes, would be a little bit different. Eventually, once we learn AJAX, we'll see how we can set up that request, get that data, and we'll be good to go. But like I previously already mentioned, we haven't covered the AJAX, and I think it is crucial that you understand the basics of how to display items on a screen, because it will be your bread and butter as you're working with JavaScript. So I have my menu. For the time being, I'll collapse it. I will reference it once in a while, just when I would want to show some properties or maybe some values and all that. And just always remember that you have it in your own app.js. So if you ever need to take a look at it, just open it up and you can take a look at the specific information you're looking for. And we'll start by selecting the section center. Now, why am I selecting the section center? Because remember that DOM content loaded. That was one of the events that we already used in the previous project, where I had window, add event listener. So I was listening for that DOM content loaded. So when my page loads, and then I had a callback function. So here's what I would want to do. When my page loads, I will access my menu, so my array, and I'll dynamically populate these items. Or I need to place those items somewhere, correct? So if I'm checking out my index.html, which is the parent for all my items, for all my single items? Well, that is the section center. That's why we'll need to start by targeting the section center. So I'm going to go here with const and then section center. Again, you can call this variable however you'd want. I just went the long way. And then a document. Then you guessed it, query selector, since that seems to be my favorite one. And then section center. Awesome. I selected my parent. Now, well, remember, we had DOM content loaded. So when our page loads, we would want to do something. So I'm going to go here with window, then add event listener, and then I would want to listen for that DOM content loaded event. So I have my parentheses, okay, I have my quotation marks, and I'm listening for DOM content, and then loaded, and then of course in here, I'll have my callback function. Now within the callback function, we'll start very, very simply by just console logging shake and bake, just so we can see that everything works. We'll head to my console. I already have the shake and bake. Once I refresh, notice again I get my shake and bake. Beautiful. Now let's see what we can do with our menu array. What would be the plan? Well, we could set up a map method, correct? So I have my items. Now I would want to iterate over those items and dress them up in HTML. Now that is a term that I came up with. Again, that is not official terminology, but just let's think about it. So we have our HTML, right? So we have our article and everything. And then in each of these elements, whether that's image, whether that's heading 4 or whatever, I just have some kind of data. This at the moment just points to some specific image. This one just says buttermilk pancakes. But I have that data already in my items. So I would just need to come up with some kind of way where I can iterate over those items, and then I can just add some HTML and then place this data in that HTML. Again, my terminology is dress them up in HTML, but of course, that is not official or anything like that. Now, the way it will work is, first of all, I will collapse this, and we'll use our map method. And we'll assign it to some kind of variable, because that would make sense. Since we're creating a new array with a map, we might as well do that. So let. Now I'm purposely using let, and you'll see in a second why. And again, we need to come up with some kind of name. I'm going to go with display menu here. And then I'll use my menu array. And like I said, we'll use map method. Now the way map method works is just like with filter. We could access each and every item in the parameter. And as always, it is a parameter. So in this case, I'm just going to call this item. Now what's really cool that with map, we can modify our array. And just to showcase, let's just start very simply by returning the same item. So I'm just going to go here, item. Now if you would want, you can also console log item, if you don't believe me, that you'll access each and every item. And then in here, I'll just console log display menu, like so. And then let's see. So notice I have all these items. I have 9 of them. So for each and every iteration, I can see my item with all the IDs, with all the categories, prices, and all that. So all the properties are there. And then in the bottom, of course, I have the same array. So in this case, I didn't do anything. I just looped over it, iterated, and then said, okay, just return the same item. Okay, that's an easy part. Now let's make it a little bit more interesting. What if I would want to access, for example, I don't know, title property, but then what's really cool that with map, I can customize, or you can say you can modify the new data structure that you'll have. So in order to make it a little bit more interesting, instead of returning the item, why don't we try this one out? Why don't we say, you know what, I'll return a template string. And remember, within template string, we could just write HTML. And then I'm going to say, hello world. And then we'll close out the heading 1. Now, what do you think is going to be in the display menu? It's going to be 9 items, correct? Because that is the total of my menu already. But what do you think are going to be the values? So let's see, let's save it. Now I have a bunch of hello worlds. So I have hello world. So again, same amount of items that I had in the menu. In this case, I modified what was my response. So now my response is, of course, hello world. Okay, that is good. But what I'm really looking for is this guy, the title, correct? And I already know that when I'm using the template string, what I can do. I can place a variable in there. And since I can access each and every item, we already saw that in a console log. What do you think I can do over here? I can delete hello world. I can use the $sign, and I can access my variable. Now, what is my variable name? So this is my object, the item. And what is the property for my title? Item, dot, and then title. That's it. Now, what do you see here on the right-hand side? I have heading 1 with buttermilk pancakes. I have a second one, third one, and again, all the way till the end of my array. And all the titles are unique. So all of them have been added like so. And then the actual values are referencing exactly what I have in my array. Don't believe me? You can double check. And you'll see that the titles are exactly the same as the values in my title property. Okay, good. Now what? Well, remember, we were setting up the index HTML. And this was the whole point. This was why we went through all the hassle to set up all the HTML, because I'm not going to be returning the heading 1. I'm going to return everything that I have in my single item. Just grab the whole article, head back to app.js, and then instead of heading 1, copy and paste your article. So now you're returning the article. And now let's think about it. What do we need to do? So right now, of course, I'm returning the hard-coded article. But we already saw with a heading 1 example that, of course, we can make this dynamic, correct? So how do we make this dynamic? We start accessing the variables. We start accessing the properties in our object. And we'll start with our image, of course. So instead of hard-coding this menu item, I will go with my $sign. Of course, I'm accessing my variable. And then the property name is item img. So that's where I have my image. As far as the class, I will keep the class, of course. But then as far as the alternative, I'm just going to go with a title, actually. So item title, just like I had in heading 1. Then heading 4, what do you think we'll place here? Yes, you are correct. We'll look for item dot title. So the same one as for the alternative. Price. Well, the property name is price. So I'm going to go here, item price. And then the last one is the text. Now for the text, the property name is description. So delete my hard-coded option. Then again, I'll use my variable here. And we'll go with item and then description, like so. We'll save it. And now, of course, I can see that I'm getting these items. And what do you think is going to be our next step? Well, next, I would want to join them in one string. Why? Because I would want to place them in my section center. And I can do that by using join method. So since this is an array, we're getting back the array, the display menu, we have an option of running the join method, which just joins it in one string. Okay. Now let's see how it's going to look like. I'm going to go here with display menu. So since I'm using let, of course I can override it. And I'll just say, all right, yeah, display menu will stay the same, but I'll run display menu join. And then we need to have here empty quotation marks. Now there's multiple values that you can add here, but the reason why we're adding here empty parentheses is because then we won't have these annoying commas in between. So let's save it, and you'll see that we will have a one giant string. Now, if you won't add that, you'll see that in between them, you'll have those commas. So let me find, we have article here, and then notice in between articles, you have this comma. So what will happen, that will be the item that will be displayed, and you don't want that. So you for sure want to add those quotation marks here, the empty ones, and that way you won't have those commas in between those articles. So now we have that big giant string. And what do we do now? Well, we just add it as our data. So the way it will look like, we'll go with section center. So remember that was our parent, of course. Then we go with inner HTML, and then we just pass it here. We say display menu, because this is the data that we're getting back. We looped over our array. We return new setup. We actually added here a string with HTML syntax. We dynamically populated it. Then at the very end, we joined all of them together. And then we're just placing it in the section center, which is the parent. Then we're using inner HTML property, and we're just setting it equal to our display menu. And you'll see that the moment you navigate to a bigger screen, voila, we have all the items, and they reference exactly what we have in the array. Again, this is going to be your bread and butter. You'll have some kind of items. You'll have to iterate over items. You'll have to decide what you would want to return. So what kind of info? As you saw with heading 1, we can return whatever we would want. In our case, we had specific HTML. Then we joined everything together and then just placed it in the parent element. And then we used the inner HTML and then just assign this to whatever we got back once we run join method on our array. That's going to be something that you'll do very, very often as you're working with JavaScript. Great work. We are done with our initial setup. However, in order to set up filtering, if we wouldn't want to repeat ourselves, it would be better if I would place all this functionality in a function. And then as a parameter in a function, I'll pass in the array. And again, it will make way more sense as we set up the filtering. At the moment, you would be like, okay, why is this guy refactoring the code again? Again, in order to set up filtering, it will just make sense if we set up this functionality in a function, because that way it's going to be much more easier. We won't have to retype this. And I'll name this, I don't know, display items or display menu items. Maybe that would be a nicer name for my function. So I'm going to go here with function, and then display menu items. Like so, that is my function. And then, like I said, this item will be looking for the array. So this function will be looking for some kind of array. Now, in this case, we'll still use our menu one, but since it is parameter, I'm going to call this menu items. That's going to be my parameter. And as an argument, yes, initially we will still pass our menu. But as we start filtering, you'll see why it's so convenient for us to have it as a function. And now what I would want is just grab everything that we have within a function body, within a callback function, everything up to here, cut it out. So now it's just going to be empty, copy and paste. But what I would like to change right now is instead of iterating over the menu, that is of course our array, I would want to iterate over the array that will pass in the function. So I'll have here menu items array. And now, of course, since I would want still everything to work, I'll call my function. I'll call display menu items function. And like I said, initially, yes, I'll still pass in my menu array. So what happens is I have my menu items array. That is, of course, my parameter. And as an argument, I'm passing in the menu. And you'll see that our functionality will still work. So everything will still stay the same. The difference is now when we'll set up filtering, it's just going to be much more easier because we'll have our function. And then depending on the situation, we'll call our function and we won't have to retype this. It is just going to be a faster setup. And as a side note, I have been adding some references for you. For example, if you check out basic.txt, you'll see the previous code. So just in case as you're refactoring with me and something doesn't work, just remember that in the basic.txt, you'll have access to the code that you had in the beginning of the video. So that way you can just make sure that you don't make some kind of bug. Or if you make a bug, then you can find where is your actual error. But that should do it for this video. we now have our functionality in the actual function, and we're ready to start adding our filtering option to our project. Two and three. Now the class will stay the same. We will target using the filter button, but I would want to change these values here. So the second one will be breakfast, like so. The third one will be lunch. And again, they're just referencing the categories that I have in the items. So for example, first one was breakfast, and I had lunch, and then I had shake. So those are the three categories that I'm using. And the last one will be shakes. Let's save it. I have the buttons. Now, of course, I can click all day long and nothing will happen, but we'll fix that in the next video. Okay, so how do we set up the functionality so that when we click on the buttons, we display specific items, whether that is the ones that are for the breakfast or lunch or shakes. So essentially the items that have the category of breakfast, lunch, or shakes, or we just display all the items. And you guessed it, we would need to head back to app.js. And I'll start by selecting my filter buttons. Now, for the time being, I'm going to close my menu. I don't think I need it. And then first I selected section center, and now I'm going to look for my buttons. So I'll create a little bit more space. So const, then I'll name them filter btns, and that is equal to my document. Then query selector all, since again I'll have a list, and then the class name is filter btn. Once I have selected my buttons, then right after the window add event listener, I will just listen for the actual event on the buttons. Of course, I'll iterate over them, but then I'll attach a event listener for each and every button. Now, of course, you can place it here at the very end. It's really up to you, but I'll place it in between. So right after the first event listener, where we're just loading all our items. So let's say load items, and then I'll say filter items. And then in here, I have my list, I have my filter buttons, and now I want to iterate over it. So we already know that we have filter buttons. We can run for each. Then we have our callback function. We're referencing each and every button as a parameter. So I'm just going to say here btn. And then for all 4 buttons, I would like to add the event listener. I'll be listening for click event. And then this is going to be interesting. Well, we will understand how the data set property works. So I have my function. I'll still look for my event object. Beautiful. And then within the function body, I'll console log something really cool. And that will be our data set. So I'm going to go with console log. And then I'm looking for event object, then current target. So what is going to be the current target? That is, of course, going to be our button, the one that we're clicking on. And then I'll look for the property that we haven't covered yet, and that is a dataset. Now, please keep in mind, dataset property is not unique to a buttons, but we're just using in this case. So you can add this dataset also to, of course, all the other elements as well. Now, the way dataset property works is that on the element, we can add the attribute with a data prefix. So, for example, for my button that has the text of all, I could write here data. So that is my prefix. Then we have the hyphen, and then whatever name we would want. So if you want to name this category, you can name this category.